So we've got our client-side contact form on our static website, and we've got our API that's sitting there waiting to be called. How do we glue these two things together so that they can talk to each other? Let's go and find out. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whenever it is that I find you. So in a previous video, we created a contact form in a Nuxt.js website, and in another previous video, I created an API to send an email. So in this video, we are going to wire those two things together to talk to each other in a secure, flexible, and future-proof manner. So I'm here in Visual Studio Code, and I just want to open up the solution. So previously we worked on the Azure function in isolation, and you'll see when I now open it up in the larger context of the rest of the project, I get a little warning down here saying, do I want to add in the settings to this particular project? And you'll see the settings there just being added for the Azure functions. So this enables me to run and debug the Azure functions that are sitting inside this API folder directly from within my larger Nuxt.js project. So it's essentially just copied these settings across to the larger project. So nothing too sinister there. So let's get ourselves in shipshape and run this up so that we can see what we're doing. Okay, so we're now up and running, and this is our contact us site, or page rather. The first thing we need to do is go to that page. Let's bring that up in Visual Studio Code, and we've got our call down here, which at the moment is only just pretending to actually call something, but doesn't actually call anything at all. And we've got our success message if it all works. So let's go and replace that code with something that's a little more realistic. So first off, we're going to use a library called Axios, which is something that we set up when we initially created this project. So Axios is a library that wraps around HTTP calls basically and makes it a lot easier and simpler and more robust to make those sorts of calls. So in a Nuxt.js application, you can get to the Axios library by doing $Axios, as we said there, and we're doing a post in this case. So we want to post to our API, which is on localhost 771, which we'll start that in a moment to get that going, and on the API/send email message URL. The data that we're going to post in to that API request is our form data. So this is the shape of our form data up here. So we've got name, email, and inquiry, which is coming from the fields as part of our form. And we pass in the values in all of those, and we expect errors to come back from the API potentially. Hopefully we wouldn't get any, but we've got the facility there to accept errors back and show those on the UI. That's all what we put in place previously. So if that post request doesn't have any problems or throw any exceptions, then we then carry on and we do what we did before, which is to show the success toast and then reset the form. So we clear out all the data from the form. If we do have some kind of error, then we show a toast to say that something went wrong to the user, and we basically log that out in the console so that we can go and look at that in our developer console over here and see what went wrong. So let's start our Azure function behind the scene, and just while that's starting, you can see here that we're getting an ESLint warning. We shouldn't be logging to the console in a production site, basically, is what it's trying to warn us about. So as this is only in development at the moment, it's fine. If we really wanted to go and get rid of it, then we could follow this quick fix and disable it, either just for this one line or for the entire file, and that puts in a pragma to basically remove that warning. But for now, I'm going to ignore that. So the Azure function is now started and sitting there listening on localhost 771. So let's go and give this a test. So we'll give some dummy name, some dummy email address, and some dummy inquiries, and we send that in, and we get an error straight off the bat. So let's go and just broaden this out a little bit. and bring up the dev tools. And we can see straight away in the console we've got a problem because our origin is localhost 3000 that we're calling from, but we're calling to localhost 7071. So this is going to give us a cause or cross origin request scripting, if I remember it rightly, problem. So you're not allowed to do this by default. So the API would have to add some functionality in to enable this to be called from our localhost 3000, basically, is what needs to happen. And the two things need to talk to each other over cause, which is a real pain in the backside. So we don't want to do it that way. But this is a good thing because it shows that our API is already exhibiting some really good security measures in stopping illegitimate access. So people calling our API from places where we wouldn't want them to be calling it from. So this is a good thing in some regards. So let's go back over here. Let's just move that over a bit. And let's try and change from 771 to localhost 3000, not with the extra HTTP. Thank you very much. And let's save that and let's try another test now. And it still doesn't work. So we now get localhost is not found. It can't find that URL basically. So what do we do about this? We're stuck between a rock and a hard place. We can't put that in to call it from our website address, and we can't put in the actual API because cause gets in the way. So what we can do is we can utilize some Nuxt magic to help us. And the way that we do that is we can proxy the requests across. So Nuxt will intercept requests to our API and basically redirect them to the real API URL. So how do we do that? We come down to just under the Axios section. We can add in the proxy section. So I've put a comment in here to say that this doesn't work with Nuxt Generate. So this is only relevant when we're running our site locally. When we actually generate our static site and create all our static files, this proxy has no real relevance at all. This is saying that whenever we get a call to anything on /API/, we will redirect that call to HTTP localhost 7071 even. And with that in place, we can add in just a couple of extra settings to the Axios library. So we're going to say, yes, we want requests to be proxied. So that's going to make sure that it takes notice of this section. And we're also going to prefix all of our API or all of our calls through Axios with /API/. So that means that when we're in our code, and if I save that, when we're in our code over here, we don't need to do /API/send message. We can do just send email message. So let's go and actually do that. Let's just get rid of all of that localhost and just call literally send email message and save that. Clear the console, wait for that to restart, and let's see what we get this time. So we still get an error down here. Now we've got a 400 bad request, and if we go over to the network tab and we look at that and we look at the response, we can see that we are getting a problem with the auth cookie not being found. So now our API security is kicking in. So we are successfully now calling our send email message, and that is rejecting our request because we're not sending in an auth cookie. It can't find an auth cookie along with that request. So we've got to go and make a change to actually get the auth cookie first. So let's go and do exactly that. Let's go and put a call in to our authenticate, and if this is not making any sense to you about the order of this, then I've got a previous video where we built this API where I go into the security mechanism that we've implemented around this API, and that goes into this whole authenticate method needing to be called before our send email message. So you can have a look at that video to understand what's going on here. So let's save that and try this again now. So let's just clear that out and that out. Give a valid email address even, and send that in. And bingo bango, we have a successful call to our API to send an email message. Now behind the scenes, I have Papercut running, and that's where I've configured this API that's running to point at Papercut. So if I just bring Papercut up, the time now is 1500, so right bang on there, so we can get rid of those ones just to avoid confusion. And let's blow this up a little bit for you. So we got our email at 1500, and that was exactly what we posted into our contact form. So we are sure that we're actually calling our API, which is good. So that's exactly what we want, and that's it, we're done. We're not really done. But if you're finding this useful, then why not drop me a comment or hit the little thumbs up below this video and let me know that you're finding these useful and that you like them. So what do we do about error handling? So when things go wrong, at the moment we're catching just this particular error. What about if we have some other sorts of errors, like the Axios library is poorly set up or the API is down, for instance? Why don't we go and add in and make this a little bit more robust? So let's replace that with that. And so now what we're doing is, if the error that comes back does actually have a response, then it means that we actually made a proper call to the server. If the error has a request, then it means something went wrong in setting that up. And if we have neither of those, then something went horrifically wrong somewhere. So in all those cases, we are still setting the same alert, and we're console logging that out to say what the problem is so that we can see what's going on. So let's go and actually prove that that works. And let's just put a useless piece of code in here just to, doesn't like that because I need to lint that out. So let's just go and do that as well. Stop and restart. Okay, so we are now back up and running. And let's come over to the console and just clear that out. So let's test this and see what we get now. And I get an error, and I get my exception message being caught down here. So all I'm doing is throwing something that's got a message in it, so it's basically being caught as we would expect and hope. So let's replace that with something a little bit more real world. So if I made a dummy call to a URL that doesn't exist, for instance, so say my API has been misconfigured, let's just go and test that. And we get exactly the same, and we get our error logged down here, and we get our HTTP request error in the log as well. So it shows that we've come through this particular path in this case. So we didn't actually make a call to a server, but we've captured that. So we could handle that in some different way, or log something else out, or make some other call. So it's useful error handling to capture that kind of stuff. So let's just prove the last of these, that we can actually get an error into this block here. So let's remove that dummy code. Let's come back over to our proxy, and let's change that to, again, another URL that's not got anything running on it. So let's just do that and run that up. And we get our HTTP response error. So again, that's good, and that's exactly what we were hoping for. So let's make sure that we're getting our server-side error validation working. So at the moment, whenever I go over one of these mandatory fields, this is all happening on the client side. It's not making any calls across to our server, but we do obviously have to make those same mandatory checks and checks that email addresses are of the correct format, etc. on our server side as well. We shouldn't rely on the fact that the client side is doing it. So let's go and simulate how we can do that. So let's just go and reset that back so that it does call our API again. And let's go and disable one of our validation rules. So let's get rid of this rule on the inquiry that makes it mandatory. So let's just save that as some arbitrary attribute. So now the rules don't actually apply to this particular field. So I can click into inquiry details and out, and I get no mandatory field being required. And so let's just go and test that. And let's not pass in an inquiry details. And I get back my expected 422 unprocessable entity, but there's nothing highlighted on the screen to actually tell me that something's gone wrong server side. So we need to plug that functionality in. So in our error response block, so this block here, we need to actually go and test if the error response is a 422, and then else if it's not a 422, then we'll do what we were doing before. So I have that in there, and if it is a 422, we need to go and get the error response data out. And what we're going to do is populate our form data errors from what's come back from the actual API call. So remember, we return back exactly the same format of data from our API. So we can just pull out the errors and assign that to the errors collection. So now that all that is in place, I can go and do exactly the same test again, and don't send in an inquiry details. And now I get the mandatory value is being required, but this is now coming from the fact that we're getting a 422 back from the server. And in our API call, we can go and have a look at the actual response. And against the inquiry, we can see that we get errors saying the inquiry information is required, which is what we then populate into the UI. So that's all good and that's great, that's working. But the problem we've got here really is that we're needing to call two calls from this particular page, when we really don't want to be having to worry about whether to authenticate. And it might be that you don't have to authenticate for every single call. In fact, we don't have to authenticate for every single call, because we have a cookie that is valid for 3 hours, so that we're sending in. So once we've done our authentication call, we're good. We don't have to call authenticate again for at least 3 hours until that JWT inside the cookie expires. So how can we get rid of this authenticate call so that what's in our page is only relevant to what we actually want to do with our API in that page? So we're getting rid of this kind of extra clutter. So let's go and have a look at how we can handle that. So Vuex is going to come to our rescue again. So where is our Vuex store? Down there. So we're going to create a new file in here called API, and having files in your store is a way of segregating things so that it's not all in the same place and make it more manageable. So let's go and add in the bits and pieces that we need in here. So for starters, we're going to need a flag inside our state to tell us whether or not we are authenticated. So this is something that we can use application wide to find out if we've already called the authentication method or if we need to authenticate. We're also going to have a getter because we shouldn't be directly accessing this, as we've said before. That's a best practice, so let's not do that. We're also going to have an action to set that authenticated flag. So this is how someone can call in to actually update that flag from false to true or true to false or whatever. And we have a mutation in here that basically is called from that action. So it's calling that commit on the update authenticated. So this line calls this line to then actually go and perform that update on the store. So with all of that in place, that is everything that we need in order to have a global authenticated flag that we can call from anywhere inside our application, and we can work out whether or not we need to make our API call to authenticate. So we can go and remove that API call to authenticate over here. We can get rid of that and we can replace that with this. So this is calling our getters against our API area of the store, saying get the authenticated flag. We will log that out just for now so that we can see what we're doing. And if that flag is false, so that's why we've got the not. So if it's not true, then we know we've got to authenticate. So we then go ahead and make our authentication call. And when that succeeds, if that succeeds and doesn't throw an exception into the catch blocks, then we can go ahead and update that authentication flag to true. So let's go and run that up, and I'm just going to go back over to the console over here, clear that out. Right, so some name, some email, some inquiry. We get our authenticating, we've authenticated, and we had a successful email. Okay, so because the flag wasn't set initially, we call our authenticate, and just to prove that that does actually now take notice of that flag, I can come in with another email inquiry, send that, and I don't see authenticating, but I still get a successful email. So we are now correctly only calling our authenticate method just the once. But again, we've now embedded even more code into our contact form. We've now got all of this code around the authentication. So this isn't something that we would want to copy from page to page and have that anywhere. So how can we extract this away so that, again, where we're trying to get to is where we've only got this in our page, which is what's relevant for our given page. So what we can do is we can use Nuxt plugins. So we can use this plugins folder down here. So let's go and create a new plugin called Axios client.js. So I've called it .client.js. That is a Nuxt.js convention to indicate that this plugin is only relevant on the client side, not on the server side. And we can go and put some code in there. So the way this works is we pass in some data from the various aspects of Nuxt. So we obviously want the Axios library to be injected in here. And what we're saying is we are going to have an event when Axios gets a request, it will call our function here. So at the moment, this is just the boilerplate for it. And we pass in that Nuxt config or the Axios config for that particular request. So let's go and flesh out what this might look like in here. So we go and do our getting of our flag. And we also have to check if the URL is the authenticate method that's being called, because otherwise we will effectively, when we do our Axios call down here, it would loop round and call on request again, and then come down here, call Axios, and we'll get into an infinite loop. So we have to stop ourselves from getting into that. So we'll only call this code down here if the Axios call is for something other than authenticate. So then if we do get into this block, we are having some login just for our debugging purposes to log out that we're authenticating. We call our authenticate and a bit more logging, and then we set our flag. So exactly what we were doing in our other contact us view, we're now doing inside this module here on every request that's made to Axios. And there's a little bit more that we need to do in terms of getting this plugged in. So we've created that plugin in our plugins. We need to come over to our Nuxt.js configuration, and there is a plugins section here that we need to put that plugin into. So we drop that in there, and then back over in the contact page, we can now get rid of all of that because that's going to happen for us. We can save that, and I am just going to stop and restart our development server so that that flag gets reset for our Nuxt application, just so that we can see what's going on. So let's give this a quick test. And we can see that we are authenticating with the API, and we've called a send email message. That's what we're authenticating for. And we've then obviously made that call and we get our authentication. So now what we've got in our contact form is literally just the Axios post that we want to make to our API, and the whole authentication mechanism and how we send that across and deal with that is all nicely extracted away. So we could make any calls to our API from any of our pages now in a nice fashion without needing to necessarily complicate our page. We obviously still need to handle our errors from that API, but that's probably going to be more page specific, like we've got here, in terms of what we actually do for given error types. And just for interest rather than anything else, if we go and actually look at what's going on, let's just blow this up. When we call our authenticate, we can see that we get an auth cookie in the response, which is what we set up inside our API to send us back. And when we call our email message, we can see that we are sending request cookies. We're sending that auth cookie because our API path is /API. So that's it. We've shown that we can call our API from our page and have the authentication mechanism all automatically abstracted away nicely, so that we can extend our website with more API calls quite easily without too much trouble. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.